They called it processing, a word so sterile. It stripped away the truth. Behind those gates, thousands of soldiers, workers, and civilians ceased to exist as names and became numbers. The train clanked to a halt in the dawn fog. Steam hissed. The guards barked orders in a language many could not understand. Hands trembled as men stepped onto frozen ground, clutching whatever dignity they still had. The smell hit first, a mix of rust, sweat, and sickness. Then the sound boots, dogs, and the dull rhythm of despair. For many, this was not the end of the war, but the beginning of a different kind of hell. Letters home stopped arriving. Diaries became whispers scratched in the dark. We are alive, but not living, inside these camps. Survival was not measured in victories or medals, but in another day of breath, another crust of bread, another sunrise behind the barbed wire. The camps were built with precision, not for comfort, but for control. Barbed wire and watchtowers rose like iron skeletons across Europe and Asia, each one designed to crush the human spirit quietly, efficiently. Inside, order was maintained by deprivation. Every movement was regulated: food, sleep, even thought. A whistle at dawn, roll call in the freezing air, and the endless count of hollow faces beneath grey skies. In Nazi Germany, the POW and labor systems fed the war machine factories, quarries, and rail lines built on bones and exhaustion. In the East, Soviet camps mirrored the same cruelty: endless labor under frostbite and starvation. Prisoners digging trenches that became their own graves. Archival note spoke plainly. Productivity must not decline despite casualties. To the overseers, men were no longer men, they were units, quotas, expendable. But even within this machinery of despair, some refused to break. In hidden corners of the barracks, they carved small crosses, traded stories, and swore that if they lived, the world would one day know what really happened behind the wire. Time dissolved inside the camps. There were no calendars, no seasons, only hunger marking the days. Prisoners learned to count not by dates, but by rations, punishments, and rumors of liberation. The mornings began with the whistle. Men stumbled from their bunks then, hollow-eyed, wrapped in lice-infested rags. The guards shouted. Dogs snarled. The day's work waited: hauling logs, mining stone, digging trenches that seemed to lead nowhere. In diaries later recovered, one prisoner wrote, "We do not dream anymore. Dreams require strength. Disease spread faster than hope. Typhus, dysentery, frostbite, silent enemies claiming more lives than bullets ever could." Sometimes a comrade would simply not rise at roll call. There was no mourning, no prayer, only silence. Because grief itself was a luxury, and yet, amid the cold machinery of cruelty, there were flickers of defiance: a stolen potato, a shared crust of bread. A song hummed quietly beneath the roar of the guards. Small acts that said, "We are still human." Hope was the most dangerous currency inside the camps. Too much of it could break a man to little, and he'd fade into the mud. Rumors drifted like smoke through the barracks. Germany is losing. The Allies have landed. Freedom is coming. Each whisper carried a heartbeat, and each disappointment crushed another. Some clung to letters that never arrived, reading the same faded words until the paper tore. Others carved names into wood or stone, a desperate proof that they once existed beyond the wire. Punishments were swift for anyone caught speaking of escape or rebellion. Solitary confinement, a hole, damp and airless. Days without food, weeks without light. For many, madness came long before death. A British POW once wrote, "I stopped believing in rescue. I began believing in endurance." It was not courage that kept them alive, but the stubborn refusal to die unseen. Even as hope fractured, a deeper will formed to remember, to endure, and to one day tell the world what the walls had hidden. Labor was not punishment here, it was the weapon. Every shovel of dirt, every swing of the pickaxe, was a slow execution disguised as work. Men were sent to mines, railroads, or factories barefoot in the snow, weak from starvation. Each day began before sunrise and ended long after dark, under the watch of rifles and barking dogs. In the German camps, the SS called it Vernichtung der Arbeit, extermination through labor. In Soviet Gulags, it was no different. The command echoed through the taiga: "Work makes you free." But freedom was a lie carved into the gates. Hands blistered, backs broke, lungs filled with dust. Those who stumbled were beaten. Those who fell were left for the cold to finish. Rations were calculated by output: produce less, and you simply ceased to exist. A survivor later recalled, "We didn't fear death. We feared dying unnoticed, face down in the dirt." The camps were not just places of imprisonment. They were factories of suffering, turning men into ghosts long before they died. Even in the darkest corners of captivity, humanity flickered like a candle in the wind. It was forbidden, and yet it survived. A guard slipping an extra crust of bread to a starving prisoner. A nurse whispering a prayer as she changed bandages she wasn't allowed to give. One man pretending to be sick so another could rest a day longer. These were crimes of compassion punishable by death, yet quietly repeated every night. Among the prisoners, kindness became rebellion. They shared what little they had: a torn blanket, a match, a memory of home. A song hummed in the dark was worth more than food. It reminded them that the soul was still alive, even if the body was breaking. In a letter hidden beneath a floorboard, one wrote, "They can take everything but not our mercy." The camps were built to erase the idea of humanity, but every whispered act of care, every secret tear shed for another, was proof that the human spirit, even buried in mud, still refused to die. When the gates finally opened, it did not feel like freedom. The war was ending, but for those who walked out of the camps, the world outside felt just as foreign as the one they'd left behind. They were living skeletons, hollow eyes, trembling hands, haunted by the taste of fear and the echo of commands. Some were too weak to celebrate. Others stared at the open sky in disbelief, as if daylight itself were a cruel trick. Liberators filmed what they found: bodies piled beside the barracks, survivors wandering in shock, clutching blankets like lifelines. The world would soon call it horror, but inside, the survivors simply called it life continuing. Yet even freedom had chains. Many were sent to hospitals, quarantined, interrogated, their stories doubted, their suffering buried under bureaucracy. Some never returned home. Others found that home no longer existed, their families gone, their towns erased. One survivor whispered, "They opened the gates, but the gates remained inside us." Liberation was not an ending, it was the beginning of remembering, and the lifelong battle to live again. Years passed, but the echoes never faded. Behind every survivor's silence lay 1,000 untold screams. Some spoke in memoirs, in interviews, in trembling voices that history almost missed. Others carried the weight quietly, their nightmares speaking louder than words ever could. The world moved on, rebuilding, celebrating victory, but the shadows of the camps lingered beneath the triumph. Diaries, scraps of uniforms, prisoner numbers tattooed into flesh, these became the only witnesses left when memory began to fade. In dusty archives, historians uncovered the truth. Documents stamped with orders, ledgers that counted men like cattle, letters that never reached their destinations. Each page was a confession, a reminder of how cruelty can become routine when the world looks away. But through it all, there remains a defiant whisper: "We were here. We endured. Remember us." To forget would be to build the fences again, to let indifference rewrite the past. The true victory is not in battle or liberation, it is in remembrance, because the interior hell of the camps did not end with war. It ended only when the world chose to listen.